I just want to say welcome to everybody to this call, to this class. There are more people showing up for this one than for the others, and it just goes to show how exciting sugar is. And I've been tapping maples for several years now. I got the idea and inspiration from our friends Jasenia and Lucas, who live nearby. They have a place called Upcycle Forages and do a lot of great outdoor living stuff. And so when Daniel and I were doing our year-long hand harvested food challenge in 2017, we went the entire calendar year eating only hand harvested food. Jasenia and Lucas said, hey, how about tapping maples? We've been doing it. Here's how. And wow, that was really exciting because with all hand harvested foods, sweeteners are really at a premium. That's some concentrated nutrition. So we were really glad to get started, and I've been doing it ever since. And I absolutely love it for a number of reasons. One is that if I can get calories from a perennial plant instead of an annual plant, that makes a lot of sense to me. That's going to be less work. That's going to be better for the soil. It fits into those agroecology principles that Rianne was talking about. If there are these perennial trees that are already growing out there without me having to do anything, and I can just stroll over and get food from them, that is awesome. And a lot of people say, well, what about honey? Do you keep bees? I have kept bees for years, and I don't do it anymore because bees are so much work right at the time of year when I have everything else going on. You know, April, May, I've got to be doing hive management and requeening or figuring stuff out with the bees. And that's right when I have to do the whole garden thing. And I have baby goats coming out all over the place. So the maples let me get food in January and February when I don't have anything else to do. So the maple tapping is the start of my agricultural year, and it's at a time when I don't have everything else happening at once. So I really love that, and I love the ethics of it. I definitely have issues with the sugar industry historically and today. My mom lives in Florida, and huge swaths of Florida have been converted to growing sugar. It's an issue that I see globally as like just an industry that I don't want to support when I vote with my dollars at the grocery store. So what can I do about that? Well, I can eat less sugar and I can find other sweeteners that are available in my area, especially the ones that are made from the sunlight that falls right here. So that is really exciting to me. Like always my question is, how do I make use of the sunlight right here? How do I do that in as ethical and sustainable a way as possible? So those are my reasons for getting to know the maples. And I tap maples for my own pleasure. Like it's one of my little phrases is, I have only myself to please. So like I do it on my scale. I don't know everything about maple tapping. Like you please feel free to ask questions and I'll do my best to answer them, but I don't have the be all end all information. And if you have things that you know and want to chime in, great. Whether in the chat now or in the comments, if you're watching this later on YouTube, just put together the information of what's going to work. I'm going to share with you what has worked with me over several years of doing this, and just some of the basics. Sounding good so far? Are you in the right place? Great. So here is a maple twig. You've got to start with the right tree, and we have no maples within Wi-Fi range. So I'm going to have to refer you also to some tree ID books or resources when you're walking around looking at which trees to tap. But here's a twig from a big leaf maple. And big leaf maples, they're a native maple. They grow naturally in this area. They're quite widespread. They're sometimes planted, but our woods right across the street here are full of big leaf maples of varying sizes. And I'll talk about which size tree to tap in a minute. Maples have this very characteristic opposite branching pattern. which you can see on this vine maple twig. Doesn't always happen, but you see how these are opposite branching right there, and then it happens farther up on the twig. Not a lot of other species have that characteristic branching pattern. So another species around here that does is Oregon ash, but they look different in other ways. So just make sure you're identifying the right tree. You don't have to tap just maples either. Walnuts make good syrup. Birches make good syrup. Well, I've never tapped walnuts or birches myself. People say they make great syrup, but you have to get a lot more sap if you're doing birch. And then of course, the big leaves, you know, just they're all crumbly this time of year, but you can check the leaves that are on your trees. And then you can wander off and tap them. You want to tap a tree, they say, you know, 10, 18 inches in diameter is about the size that you want to tap. And my experience is that trees vary a lot in the amount and the sweetness of sap they will produce. So, and you know, with sugar maples, the often kicked around figure is it takes about 40 gallons of sap from the tree to get 1 gallon of syrup. And that matches my observations here with our big leaf maples too, although I don't always concentrate my syrup down, and I have some good reasons that I'll tell you in a minute. So you want to tap large enough trees. If it's a really big tree, you can even put a couple of holes into it. And into a hole in the bark goes one of these little maple taps. Now, I used to use just a piece of PVC. I'd use usually thicker PVC, but then I went out and I bought these little plastic taps, or they're also called spiles, if you want the lingo. I bought them from Leader Evaporator, which is a company that sells maple tapping equipment. And there are lots of different styles of these. I have some that have a little rubber ball inside to kind of, I guess, help with the differing pressures, but they're all under $1 a piece. I think they're sold kind of as a as a one-time use thing, but I use them over and over and over. I've been using these same ones for years. I have to, well, when I put this in a tree, I'm committed for the next 6 to 8 weeks of taking care of that tree and not wasting the sap. And then I have to pull this out of the tree. One reason I like the plastic ones, I hate buying plastic in general, but if I forget one in a tree, for whatever reason, I don't want a chunk of metal stuck in the tree for somebody to find with a chainsaw, 50 years from now. So I just go ahead and buy these and use them year after year after year. Yeah, so that's a little bit about that equipment. Along with that comes this tubing. This is just food grade tubing that fits really snugly over part of that tap. So this goes in the tree, whoop, and then the sap is going to drip out the tube. And we should probably go check out a tree. Let's go do that. Any thoughts on what we've talked about so far?
I didn't realize that you could, wait, are there there are trees other than maple that you can actually tap other than?
Oh, yeah. You can do walnut and birch, and a lot of the people who do birch and stuff, at least from what I was reading in some of my, forestry books, is the birch and season starts after the maple season is all done. So you can kind of tap all your maples for a certain chunk of the winter, and when the maple trees are drying up and not dripping sap anymore, then you can go ahead and switch all your equipment over to birch trees. And birch sap sells, or birch syrup sells for something like $400 a gallon. You think, wow, I'm gonna get rich selling birch syrup. Well, once you make birch syrup, you might find out why that's the case. And also why maple syrup sells for 60 some dollars a gallon. Takes a lot of energy to go from the sap that comes out of the tree to the finished syrup. So that's where a lot of that effort comes in. I can't see anything because the sun is behind you all. Maybe I should shift it over here.
It looks real beautiful and bright today. No cloud
Great.
cover.
Yeah.
That was a great
Um,
question, Rachel. I'm like curious to learn more about the types of trees and also get into some tree identification because we just get to know these beautiful beings and they'll feed us.
yeah. I always like to say hi when you're tapping a maple tree. Now, this is a copper maple in our front yard. This is our primary childcare tree, as you might be able to see by the like ropes and ladders and swings in it. So we don't want to ask too much more of this tree. It's already got lots of scars. Scarred parts of the tree are not going to yield the most sap because like the circulatory system of the tree just isn't quite all in place right there. Like it's just having a hard time, so it's not going to yield the most sap. Still, I tried to find a good place on the south side of the tree here, and I want the south side of the tree because one of the influences on how much sap is going to run out of here is warming and cooling. And so the south side of the tree is going to get that nice winter sunshine and also get cool at night, warm in the day. Those are typically the conditions that yield the most sap, but you just never know. It's so mysterious. People have been studying this for thousands of years and there's still like hardly any real consensus about what makes sap flow. Like you are tapping into the mystery when you tap maple trees and when you get to know these trees. And some days certain trees will run and others won't, and then it will be reversed to the next day. Like I don't know what they're thinking. I'm just grateful to be able to drink a little sugar out of them, because when you tap sap, when you're getting the sap, those are the sugars, the carbohydrates in the roots are mobilizing and coming up to feed all the branches of the tree. Like that's what's happening. And that's why we tap trees at the time of year when they're mobilizing those resources in their roots to put up and grow new leaves for next year. So it can hurt a tree to tap too much. Like we are taking carbohydrates out of this tree. Carbohydrates that tree had to work hard to make last year. And we're saying, oh, excuse me, mind if we skim a little bit of this off? And so I don't tap too much. And I try not to put more than like 3 taps in a tree, or I'll tap from year to year and I'll check in with each tree. Like I said, I'm doing this to please myself. I'm doing this to have connection with the trees. I'll just check in with each tree and be like, does it feel like you want to give some sap this year? Great. If not, no worries. We'll check in again next year. So it's nice to have that sense of it. Oh my gosh. So here's my setup, and here are my visiting friends. Hi, everybody.
You're so gorgeous.
Hi, cuties. So this is why I can't leave my maple equipment out. Come on, chicks. Okay, so go over there. Here is my super simple setup. It is a plastic bottle with a hole drilled in the lid. The tube goes from the maple tree, and there's a little bit of sap that's in this spile. And if I suck on this tube, I don't know, you can see the bubbles moving in there. But with enough pressure and gravity, this bottle will fill up with sap. And we have these old vodka bottles lying around. And once I went out with a kids program, and I was like, here, try some sap. And then realized, oh my gosh, this does not look good. but this is this is a really simple setup. You see that if you have a little tubing, you have a spout in the tree, you just make do with what you've got. You can gather enough sap and you can drink the sap straight. It's, drunk as a health tonic around the world. It's fantastic. It's full of nutrients. It's very lightly sweet. I call it our latitude's answer to coconut water. It's kind of what it tastes like, coconut water. So I'll show you how I drill the holes too. Let me go grab another tap.
And while you're walking, we've got a question from Becca wondering how long it takes to fill one bottle of sap.
Oh, great question. Anywhere from half a day to 3 weeks. Like that's just where the mystery of, where did I drill the hole? All that stuff is just quite mysterious. So I don't know. And this bottle is a little small. I've started using 1 gallon containers just to give myself a little more leeway. I like to check at least once a day. I make the rounds of the maple trees. They're in the woods behind me. So at least once a day, I go out there and I make the rounds and I have an empty jar and I'll just fill it with all the sap that's out there in the woods and I bring it back to my evaporator setup. So it's kind of like milking the goats or something where I'm like, I've got to go out there and it's just heartbreaking for me when I am slow in checking the trees and I spill sap. I'm like, oh, so sorry. And I see a question about what height do I set the tap? So lower down is supposed to give more and sweeter syrup. Now, if I do lower down on the farm, sometimes ducks or chickens will knock it over. So sometimes I'll do it at higher spots in the trees. I have about a gazillion feet of tubing. In fact, if you're one of my neighbors, you should come just get some tubing from me. And I got that because I was planning to tap trees that were like 20 feet up a steep hill. And I could just run tubing from that tree all the way down to where it was easy for me to access and I wouldn't have to go up and down that hill. But you can see this tap on this tree is set fairly low down. And that works pretty darn well. So I will drill another hole. You can drill them wherever. It's probably better to, do it wherever works best for you. And I think I'll swing around for the lighting to be a little better. And drill them whatever works best for you. The container is going to sit on the ground. So just whatever is going to give your container stability. Also, think about where on the earth you're going to be tapping. I do tap some trees that are up along the road. Somebody planted sugar maples around a power station. I'm like, sweet, literally. So I just stroll.
Oh, sorry. I think I just did something bad.
Mute.
Sorry, I think I just did something silly. Okay.
I think you just muted me. Okay. So if I'm tapping trees in a public place, I just want my setup to be inconspicuous, not cause comment, but I'll just kind of stroll over there like I look like I know what I'm doing, and I'll drill my few small holes and I'll set my taps. And then I just have like a winter walk. I have real incentive to walk the half mile up to those trees every day. So, and get the jar of, slushy sap from those trees. So I was able to find some local sugar maples. And for drilling a hole in a tree, wherever it's going to be, you want to find some relatively unblemished wood. You can see these are little scars from previous years. If you're drilling into a tree, you're reducing the timber value of that tree. Just for folks who are thinking about, okay, am I going to sell timber off of this land in 50 years? Like, what's the future of this tree? It does cause scars in it. So I want to think about that too. Sometimes people really value those scars, like they just show the history and the use of the tree. But just be aware of those consequences as well. You want to drill a hole that's 1.5 inches 1.5 inches deep or so. And so what I do, so I'm not just guessing as I drill into the tree, is I just put a little piece of tape on the drill bit, 1.5 inches up from the tip of the drill bit. Works great. And you can use, like a hand auger. So this is just a hand auger with the bit in there. And these work great. You can hear the birds when you're out in the forest with one of these. We've got bunches of them. I just have a hard time getting the bits to stay put in them. But these you actually lean against your chest. You go up to the tree and then you turn it up. You see there, and then you turn it like that. And I'll drill into the tree. I won't go any farther than that though. But for speed, I'm often using one of these electric drill bits, and we might do a tool class later in the spring. Feel free to put in the chat if you're interested in other homestead topics, whether or not you think we at Hawthorn Farm can provide them. Please take note of them in the chat. We're putting together some ideas for upcoming classes, and it would be really fun to have the classes you want. So please make note of that in the chat. Anyhow, my drill bit bit is appropriate to the size of the tap. They often sell 2 different diameters of tap, 7/16 of an inch or 5/16 of an inch. You get the same amount of sap really for the different sized holes, and smaller is better for the tree. So given options, always just go about, just go for the smaller hole. I've tested this drill bit with these taps. I know that it's the right size. I make sure my drill button is pushed so that it drills in that direction. I have it on the drill setting. I head up to my tree, and I'm gonna need to put on a fair amount of pressure on this, and I want to go really straight in and straight out. If I start wobbling around, that's gonna give me an oval shaped hole, and sap is going to leak out the side instead of going down my tap. Pull it out to, get some of the gunk off of the bit. There we go. A nice clean hole. The tap goes in. Use anything handy to kind of really wedge it in. Now I'm ready to put a piece of tubing off of this. Put that tubing into a jar like I have this one here. Hey, look, there's some sap. There's a little bit of sap. So I put this tap in last night thinking, I wonder if there's going to be any sap in there. And there is a little bit of sap. So hooray.
That's awesome. I also just love the vodka bottle because we're being sustainable. We're reusing all we can.
Yeah. Like, I want to buy the bare minimum. Like, for me, so much of the fun of homesteading is in making do with what's already here and really only bringing in the resources that, really feel necessary. So that is the sap collection setup. And I'll show you some of the other sap collection jars. So what I use these days is more like these big jars right here. So, again, somebody gave us these. I drill a hole in the lid so that that tube can go right in there. And then this just fills up with sap. And a big tree, like the biggest mama maple that I tap out in the forest, will fill this jar on a good day. So she'll fill this jar and we'll get like this much syrup from this jar full. That's okay. That's great. That's one day. And I tap pretty much January through March. And I can tell by the flavor when it's time to stop. The maple sap starts just tasting less delicious. It gets what's called buddy, like because of the way the carbohydrates and the sugars are changing inside that sap. So I'm like, okay, I'm done. As long as it's not delicious, I'm just gonna stop. So most of my tapping happens in January. And you can see over here, my bottles of gorgeous syrup. So this is the syrup, the finished syrup. You can see I have lots of different jars and I freeze it. I don't want to mess around with syrup going moldy. I could can it, some other way of preserving it, but I just freeze these little jars. And from tapping 4 trees in the forest pretty diligently throughout January, I get a gallon of syrup. So I'm getting, 40 to 50 gallons of sap over that month from 4 nice trees. And I get about a gallon of syrup and I freeze it in these little 1/2 pint jars. And I just pulled this one out of the freezer so you can see the layer of ice on top. Can you see that? It's a little hard for me to tell if you can.
It looks
okay. So the ice is water that has frozen in the syrup because I don't get my syrup to the full concentration necessary to be syrup. I usually get it to close enough. And here's why. I was evaporating maple syrup once in the oven. I had the oven on low, like 200 or something degrees, 250 with the door propped open. And I left it in there for days. Like it just takes days to evaporate the sap. And then I said, wow, it smells good in here. And I looked in the oven and I said, is somebody baking brownies? Like who's baking this big pan of brownies? And then I realized, no, that's my maple syrup. Like totally blackened and bubbling and like totally burnt. I was able to save some of it by using it as like caramel flavoring in tea, but still it was like hours of work that had gotten charcoalized in the oven. So I'm just not willing to take those kinds of risks with the tree blood. I'm like, nope, I don't evaporate it down to, in case you want to know, 67.7% sugar. Like 67.7%. That is the magic number where you're not going to get mold and it's not going to crystallize. And how do you know that your sap is at 67.7%? Well, you use a candy thermometer. See if I can get you all set up here. So you use a candy thermometer. Pretty easy to find. Usually they're made out of fragile glass. I can't believe this one has lived this long in our kitchen cabinet and not been broken. But I can use this to record really high temperatures, like for making candy. And if I put it in here and the syrup and the temperature stabilizes right around 219 degrees Fahrenheit, then the sap is, the syrup is now is now at around 67.7% sugar. So you can do that. I don't do that. That's too much work. I'm doing this because I want it to be easy and fun and accessible. And I store it in the freezer, so I don't need it to be a particular concentration. If you want to, there you go. I use a pan like this to evaporate my sap. So this is where the big energy consumption of maple syrup comes in. And when we were just starting, I was talking about a friend in Quebec who is engineering reverse osmosis systems for big commercial maple syrup making companies. And a maple syrup company will have, 60,000 holes in trees that they are tapping. Like they're making a lot. I have like 6 holes in trees, but I want to boil the sap so that the water comes off of here. And then that reduces down and gives me my syrup of whatever concentration works well for me. So I want to use a flat pan. I like using stainless steel. I wouldn't really want to use Like we have this kind of, like a chipped enamel one. It's a little rusty, or I have a bigger aluminum pan. Wouldn't be thrilled to use aluminum. These old rummage sale pans, stainless steel, work great. Like some kind of hotel pan, awesome. You want a lot of surface area. We heat with a wood stove. So I just plop this onto the top of the wood cook stove and it gently steams off. Now, it makes our house quite moist. If I have a really good sap runs one day, and I don't want to put 3 gallons of water into the air in our house, I'll come outside to a propane stove. I'll set up the propane stove. And then I pull up a chair and I just read a book there, because you remember the burned syrup in the oven? That's not going to happen. Like, I just want to sit there and pay attention to it. This is a fairly demanding process, or can be, just because you just don't want it to go terribly, terribly wrong. Like, a pan can be evaporating gently, gently, gently for days and days and days. And then within 20 minutes, it's burned at the very end of it because of the way the sugar concentrations work. So that's why I just devote myself to the process, and why I love doing this in the wintertime when we've got the wood stove going anyways. And I just evaporate off multiple gallons this way, a little bit at a time. As soon as I have a batch that looks fairly well concentrated, I'll let it cool and pour it into my jar. I don't use a glass pan because of the high temperatures involved. And I want to be able to take this out to the propane stove and be able to put it right on the propane stove if needed. So yeah, I've had enough Pyrex dishes shatter in my day. Yeah, so that's a little bit about the, how to get the sap from the tree, get it into some place where you can evaporate off the moisture, and then how to store it and enjoy it. And of course, you can use it any way that you would use maple syrup that you would get by any other means, but it's gonna be better. The big leaf maples have a wonderful vanilla flavor to them. Like, I just really love it. Since I don't grow vanilla, it's really nice to have the big leaf maple syrup. I saw the question where you can add other flavors to it. That also depends on how strong the concentration is, depending on what you add. Again, I store mine in the freezer, so there's not so much of a risk of spoilage. The sap that comes out of the tree, that has about the same shelf life as milk, if you want to think of it like that. Like, it's a watery fluid with sugar in it, so it will spoil. And the fresher the better. Like, I like just walking out to the trees and just sipping right from there. You can freeze the sap to cook later. I just feel like it just takes up oodles of freezer space. Like, do you have 40 gallons worth of freezer space? So, things to consider. Everybody's situation is going to be different. You need to get a lot of moisture off of here, and really kind of depends on your freezer space. It's not worth saving a very small quantity of sap. And one reason I use the same pan the whole season is I don't want to wash the maple syrup residue out of here. Like, even whatever syrup is stuck on this pan, that took a lot of work to get. So I just keep that pan and I keep using it. I keep adding fresh sap to it. I don't like to store sap more than a few days. I will leave sap out on a cold, cold night, because if ice forms in that sap, I can scoop that ice out, and that ice is pretty much pure water. Maybe I'll make a cup of tea with it. But if I can scoop out ice, then I'm taking away more water and I'm leaving more sugar, and I have less work to do in the pan, less moisture that's going to be in our house, less wood I have to burn, even though we're pretty much using waste heat anyways. We heat our house with wood, so that makes it convenient to do it. If you have any kind of radiator set up or something, a place where you can set this up where moisture is coming off of here, great. I think it's totally possible to experiment and give it a try. Yeah, did I miss other questions that flowed through the chat there?
So let's see. We had one of our participants say that they checked their taps. Brittany checked her taps and they were flowing. So that's awesome. Someone else was following up with a question for Brittany, wondering how cold it got where Brittany is. So maybe if you want to answer that for us, if that. So it does. Does it really kind of matter about how cold it gets at night versus how warm it gets in the day? Is that?
Yeah, that's what I have learned, is that the temperatures really have to get cold at nighttime, and then on a day like today where it just gets hot, that's where you're getting the most of the sap flowing.
Oh, so congratulations.
Yeah, it's really exciting.
Yeah.
It looks good out there.
I have a question too, Alexia, for just wondering about the legality of tapping trees. One of our members mentioned that you've got to make sure that you can tap the trees if they're not on your own property. So I just want to state that for everybody, make a connection maybe with the people whose trees you're interested in, because they're likely not tapping them. Just quick little mention on that.
Great.
And we had one more question. Does it taste better when it's most fresh?
The sap tastes better to me. You know, the fresher, the better, for sure. Refrigerated, it can keep a week or so and is a great winter tonic to drink. I just love drinking it, you know, from the jar that's coming out of the tree. Another thing about that is you want to make sure that your container is keeping debris and insects out of that treasure trove of sap. So make sure that, you know, that's why I drill the hole through the lid of the container so that there's minimum debris in there. And sometimes a little bit of debris will wind up in my pan and I pretty much just eat it. I'm like, you know, if I run this through a filter, I'm going to be losing maple goodness in whatever filter I have. So I'll just put up with a little piece of bark or moss in my syrup. I can live with that. And I also wanted to mention maple sand or sugar sand, as it's called. So as we evaporate off all the moisture, certain minerals are going to crystallize out of the sap. And that's called sugar sand. It's malate of lime. It's not harmful. You know, you don't really find it in commercial maple syrup because it's filtered out, but you will find it if you make any significant quantity of maple syrup on your own. And again, I just eat it. I don't know, I'm not eating a large enough quantity that I'm worried about it, but you could always skim that out or filter your maple syrup or just take the top off the jar and then, you know, rinse and leave the sugar sand behind. It's just kind of these little crunchy crystals. Again, hasn't been a problem for me, but you're probably going to encounter it, and it doesn't mean that anything is wrong with the process or your tree. Yeah.
Thank you. There's so much to this process that I'm so curious about. It's getting me excited to think about what ancient people and indigenous people used to do, and maybe how long these processes took, and if it was like a community, like fire gathering, just watching the sap, you know, make its way to school. We do have a couple questions too. Audrey is asking, with the sap in the small jars that were frozen, what will you do with those next? In other words, is it ready to go, or do you just scoop the ice off from the jar and then?
Why, yes. So you notice they're all labeled BLM, big leaf maple, 120. And these have thawed a little bit, but yeah, I have this blob of ice at the top. So that's just like ice cream. Look at that snowball out there. And then this is So you can see it's not as syrupy as maple syrup you will buy, but yeah, it's ready to go. I could evaporate it down more if I really wanted to, but why? This is incredible. This is like the taste of the forest right here.
That
And
looks
it's super, super good. Yeah. Pretty amazing. So definitely encourage you all to get out there and try this. And I would say too that some of the magic of this is that is I'm really trying to remember what is my impact, how do my desires influence my impact, and if I want sweetener, am I willing to put in the work myself and to really appreciate what it takes to get this. So I do this work with the maple and I don't buy a lot of other sweeteners, and that just makes this like all the more satisfying to me. Like this really tastes incredible. Yeah, and I would just encourage you all to try it and get to know your trees that are around you, the ones that you can, you know, safely and sensibly tap. And it's a great chance to get to know neighbors. I've certainly talked with neighbors and said, hey, there's an enormous big leaf maple on your lawn. Can I put a little collection bottle on the other side? You won't know I'm here. I'm just going to be walking back and forth every day or so, and I'll bring you a jar of maple syrup. So it makes an incredible gift with a lot of great stories. And I love giving jars of this to folks in the neighborhood and saying, hey, this is from trees that you walk past. Like these are from trees right here, and it's delicious. Yeah. Other questions?
Thank you so much. I love this, you know, building self-mastery, self-reliance, and just connections with nature and all that we can do. We do have some more questions, and I just want to really quickly state we're all drooling. That looks so good, and it's a great motivation to try. So one question. Let's see, sorry, I lost it. Janine just wants to double check and clarify what temperatures are good, are needed in order to have sap flowing. Like if it's winter months, but can you just clarify really quick?
Right. Great question, Janine. And I'm not enough of a like commercial or, you know, widespread maple tapper to know. Thanks for joining us. I know you're in Idaho where it's probably going to be a slightly different season. Here, as Brittany mentioned, we can start tapping in December. Sap is flowing. There are little daffodil leaves coming up out of the ground here already. So that tells me that the sap is moving, and your mileage may vary. You can put a tap in a tree and see when it starts dripping and just see when you start getting that flow. Usually it is in a time of year where it's, you know, the sap is moving, like plants are starting to grow, carbohydrates are getting mobilized for that. So I think in the Northeast, like people will start in March or so, kind of a March, April kind of thing, when you're getting those frost and thaw cycles throughout the day. Yeah.
Thank you. Yeah, we Janine followed up and said that she's tapped in Vermont before, which is like a really cool experience. So it's cool to bring that back to the West Coast. And we have a question from Al wondering if at the end of the season, or how do we remove the tap safely at the end of the season?
Great question. So the taps need to come out 6 to 8 weeks after I put them in. That's kind of the window. 6 to 8 weeks in, the edges of the hole, you know, it starts healing up, the bark starts growing back, and I don't want it to close around that tap. The taps can get pretty hard to remove. I pound them in snugly. I want them to be a really snug fit when I put them in, so I don't have sap oozing down the trunk. So I usually just go with a crowbar and a little piece of wood, so I'm not marring the bark of the tree, and I just poink, pop them off. And if they break, they break. Usually I've been able to get them all out intact. And I want to pull them out, and then I just let the hole heal naturally. They've always healed fine. I don't put anything in there. I just let the sap wood and the bark do its magic, and they heal up nicely, especially with a small size hole. So yeah, that's how I've done it. Just pry them out, even it's like back of a hammer kind of thing. The claw of a hammer should be able to pull those out easily. But just don't forget about them and like leave them in there all summer.
Thank you. We're running up at 10 minutes to the end.
Hey.
I was curious about the process of the crystallizing and just the evaporating. So if I were to do this outside with like a propane stovetop that you're mentioning, would that also take a couple of days, or would it take more like hours?
A little more like hours. Often I'll try to get sap reduced down either through freezing, like I talked about, where I skim off the ice, or just from a few days on the wood stove. And then I'll give it a final blast on the propane stove when I sit there watching it, because I can really crank up the heat on the propane stove. My issue with that is I wind up I'm like, okay, how much propane am I using to get this? It's probably still a better equation than shipping sugar from across the country. But I just try to, minimize the use of propane, but doing it outside really helps keep the house dry. So a couple of things to consider there. But yeah, it's 1 hour on a propane stove, depending on how much sap you're talking about, is going to get you a lot closer to syrup.
Excellent. And we have another question from Darian, wondering if the same tap is good for a couple of months, or does a tree heal over a spot? And I'm kind of envisioning you're asking, can we keep the tap in for that for a couple of months?
I mean, a couple of months, like 8 weeks, yeah, for sure. But usually 8 weeks into the season, the sap is starting to taste different. It's starting to taste buddy, and have just less of the delicious sweetness and having more of a kind of astringent or planty flavor that I don't really love. So as soon as my taste buds tell me to stop, I stop. And that's usually around the beginning of March, maybe end of February for me around here. And that's when, in the Northeast, like they're just starting the tapping season. So we can get going early. And that's why I'm excited. This is a December class. So you can just be prepared, like Brittany's already got those taps in. I'm inspired to go get started a little early this year too. Yeah.
Excellent.
And I wanted to show also just another perennial sweetener. This is apple juice concentrate. So this is kind of at the other end of the winter. In the fall, we reduce down apple juice and make amazing concentrate there. This is apple juice that's canned, that we can also have on the wood stove and be reducing down. So just to have diversity in those sweetener sources, and the apples and the maple trees are both perennial plants that we can make a lot of great use of, and they very generously share the sweetness with us. So just to say, you can, try a couple of different saps or juices. I just, pour some of the apple juice over dried fruit or frozen blueberries, and nobody complains. Yeah.
I love the alternatives to sugar, it's a very controversial industry, and it's just so nice to, expand our definition of sweetness and including like fructose, other fructose that exists and is in our backyards. If we're lucky to have a yard, there's probably a lot more going on than we realize in there.
Sure, for sure. And it's been a long few years of recalibrating my taste buds to other forms of sweetness, but it's really felt worth it in terms of personal and planetary health. So yeah, I'm really enjoying life and what I eat, and the limitations of I only have so much maple syrup actually increase my delight in these sources of sweetness. Yeah.
Well, I guess we've got 5 more minutes left. Was there anything else you were hoping to make sure we know, and then maybe we'll have another little Q&A kind of moment.
Well, I would just hope that you see trees more clearly and with appreciation through this process. They do a lot for us, and to walk around the neighborhood and to feel that resource coming in and to feel how excited I've been tapping trees and getting to know them this way, and to know them year after year. Like, this tree tastes like this. This tree produces reliably. Like, this tree is a scanty producer, but it's really sweet. I mean, it's just great to get to know their personalities too. So hoping that you manage to do that with whatever trees are around you.
Absolutely.
Happy to take a few more questions too.
Thank you so much. For folks who have questions, definitely you can let us know in the chat. You can also maybe unmute yourself at this time if you'd like. See, Terry's commenting, saying their problem is never knowing when it's done. Might you speak to that?
Yes. Again, my taste buds are my guide, and 6 to 8 weeks after I've started, I'm ready to wrap up. Like, as soon as I get less excited to go out and fill up the sap jar, as soon as I get less excited to walk out there every day, I can be done. The trees don't mind if I stop early. I can pull those taps out anytime and they'll just go about their business. And I've seen squirrels and sapsuckers coming to the holes where I've pulled out my tap, but there's still some sap dribbling. So others are happy to make use of anything I leave behind too. I've actually seen squirrels chewing on maple bark in order to get the sap out. So we're in good company appreciating what these trees give us.
Alexia, how do you make sure that you're not taking too much sap?
Great question. A lot of experts recommend just having 1 tap per tree, whatever the size of the tree, and then you're probably not going to take too much. So some people will tap in alternate years. You're definitely taking something from the tree. Estimates are each tree can give you about a quart of syrup. So if you have just a small hole in the tree, you're probably not going to take more than that tree can give.
Yeah, there's so much to thank you for. Just all the education you've been able to give us has been absolutely fantastic. And I just wanted to share with other people we're about to wrap up the call, but we have really like a year's worth of education with Hawthorn Farm, or at least like from the summer onward of 2020, all this education on our virtual events page and virtual education page at 21acres.org, also our YouTube channel. But there are awesome topics like sauerkraut making, fermenting, canning courses with mainly about tomatoes, but also just how to can was really helpful. And then there's other sustainable topics like land stewardship with tree pruning, water-wise gardening, and we have so much more education on our website. So when I send out this resource list, I'm going to include the link there, but definitely check out what you can do and prepare, for the upcoming months. I love winter because we can prepare for the summer, build those foundations for the spring, and just keep living in harmony. But yeah, people are sharing sentiments of gratitude for you and thanking you.
And thanks to everyone at 21 Acres for helping make this possible, and thanks to the trees and everyone here showing up. Feel free to flag me down with stories of how it goes. Thanks for navigating the sauna building project in the background and all the funny lighting here on this rare, amazing, sunny day that is making the sap flow.